Hey guys, it's Tori, and first of all, I wanted to start off by apologizing for this lighting. That is not it. It is raining, and it's probably going to be pretty stormy the rest of the week, so I just don't know when to film when it's going to be actually sunny. And my artificial lighting is at my parents' house, and I just have not been in a position to get it or just to film over there or anything. So we're just gonna have to deal with this darker, not great lighting that makes it look a little fuzzy, especially on this side. So again, I apologize for that. But let's just get into the tag I'm doing today, which is the Omnivore Reader tag. This tag was originally created by A Cup of Books, so I will link that original video down below. And I actually, as far as I know, was not tagged by anyone, but I first saw this on Katja Weinert's channel, so I will link her version of the tag down below as well. And I thought it looked really fun, and I've seen it go around a little bit, and I just decided I'd like to give it a try because it just seems like a fun tag. Basically, how we do this tag is the person doing it will pick 4 different genres or subgenres that they really like to read. And there's just 3 questions you have to answer for each one. First of all, what's your favorite from that genre? What book are you currently reading or just read in that genre? And what's the next book you would like to read in that genre? So pretty basic, but kind of fun to talk about some favorites. So let's get into this. So the first, it's not really a genre, it's more like a grouping of books, but my first genre-ish that I want to talk about that's my favorite is classics. Many of you know I very much love to read classics, and the more I read them, the more I find that I prefer them over most other books, actually. I just really love the character depth that can be found in many classics. Not that it can't be found in more contemporary literature. Something about the language and the way it's done in classic literature, I just really appreciate, at least a lot of the classic literature I've read. So starting with my favorites in this genre, I'm going to have to name 4 because these 4, honestly, depending on the day, different ones of them will be considered my top favorite, just depending on my mood, what I've been interested in recently. So I'm going to just name all 4. I apologize if that bothers you, but I genuinely these 4 books change around in their placement all the time, and so it's hard for me to really narrow them down. So anyway, we're going to start with the only one I actually physically have, and that is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Absolutely love this book. This is the cute little movie edition from this 2020 version of the movie. Or was it 2019? I think it was 2019 that it came out. But anyway, I have a few copies of this book, but I just love it. I love the sisters, the March sisters. I love how different they are, but how relatable they are. Even a couple hundred years later, they're still so relatable, and I just really love this story so much. Then the next one I want to mention is Agnes Grey by Anne Brontë. This is my favorite of the Bronte's works, obviously, and one of my favorite books of all time. I just really loved the sweetness in the story. It's a very charming story without feeling overly sweet and without being boring, in my opinion. Other people may disagree, but I feel like just the way it's written really is very engaging, and I really like Agnes as a character, and I love the sense that I get whenever I read it, that it's really showcasing Anne Brontë herself, the author, and her feelings and her opinions, and there's just something really powerful about sensing the rawness that Anne is sharing through Agnes Grey, so I really love that book. Next, of course, we have Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. Love this story. It's so heartbreaking. It makes me feel so many emotions, but I find it fascinating to think about the characters. I love Tess as a character. I despise people in this book. I love people in this book. It's just such a good story. And I understand people not liking it simply for the fact that it is so sad, but I also do think it's Hardy's best work, at least so far from what I've read, and it's just very powerful, so definitely one I absolutely love. And the last one I'm going to mention is Les Misérables by Victor Hugo. Now this one for a long time I considered just my 4th favorite, but recently I've just been pondering it and realized that I just really love that story. I love Jean Valjean as a character. I love Fantine. I just found the whole story fascinating, and the depth of character development that goes on in that story so fascinating. And even though there's a lot of portions of like history lessons and philosophy lessons that I may not necessarily care as much about, there is still something charming about it when you love the rest of the story so much. So I really love that book. Okay, what am I currently reading in the classics genre? I actually have two that I'm currently working on in this genre. And once again, they're both 19th century literature, so I bet you can't tell I have a favorite. I could have just said this is 19th century literature that I'm talking about, but I like other classics too, it's fine. Anyway, the two I'm currently working on is I'm buddy reading The Woodlanders by Thomas Hardy with both Jennifer Brooks and Margaret Pinard. Loving it so much, it's so good. The other one I'm currently sort of working on, although I'm primarily focusing on this, is The Half-Sisters by Geraldine Jewsbury, and I'm really liking this so far. I'm literally like 6 pages in, so not far at all. I'm kind of just reading this when I have time and want to read, but I've finished my portions of The Woodlanders and another book I'll actually mention later in this video. As I finish my portions of those and I have time and have a desire to read, I'll pick this up. So once I finish The Woodlanders, I'll focus more on this, but I am really enjoying it. And then what do I plan on reading next for classics? The next one actually is another 19th century piece, so I should have just gone with 19th century to make it more specific. But I am planning to start Anna Karenina once I finish the audiobook I'm currently working on. I'd like to start the audiobook of Anna Karenina, although I'm planning on reading that one along with the audiobook, so I'm going to be physically reading and listening to get through that one. But yeah, so that's my plans up next. I'm a little intimidated by it, but I'm also pretty excited to get into it. The next genre I'm going to talk about is fantasy, and I was considering breaking this down into specifically adult fantasy because I prefer that. However, I do really like middle grade fantasy. I don't mind YA fantasy, so I decided to just do a blanket statement on that one. As far as favorites for fantasy, I don't know how to narrow it down because there's a lot I really love. I think I'm going to say Words of Radiance from the Stormlight Archive series by Brandon Sanderson. Really, really love that book specifically. I like the whole series, but as for a single book, that's my favorite. Harry Potter, of course, I absolutely adore. Definitely a favorite. Inkheart by Cornelia Funke is a wonderful fantasy series that I just absolutely adore. And then I'll also mention Circe by Madeline Miller because I absolutely love that book. That one's following Circe from the Odyssey. It's a very character-driven story, but it's really, really good. As for what I'm currently reading from the fantasy genre, I'm currently reading Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. This is actually a reread for me, but it's been really good so far. I'm not super far into it, maybe like a fourth of the way, a little less than a fourth, but I am enjoying it a lot. It's a lot of fun, very fairy tale-esque, and I always enjoy that, so it's been good so far. If you don't know, this is about a girl named Sophie who is the oldest of 3, so she knows that if she ever goes out to discover her fortune, she will fail miserably being the oldest of 3, and so she kind of just lives her life in her family business and just kind of accepts her lot in life, essentially. But one day she ends up making a witch very angry and gets punished for it, and things go on from there. It's a really charming little story, and I'm excited to continue with it. As for what I'm reading next, I honestly don't know, primarily because there's a couple of readathons coming up I want to participate in that are mostly classics based, and so it's hard for me to really know for sure what other books I want to read and when I'm going to get to those. I think I'm going to go with The Princetta by, I can't even remember the author, but here's the cover. This is going to be another reread. It's on my list of goals for this year to reread this, and it's one that I read when I was younger and really, really loved. It's about a princess who has to get married, but she doesn't want to, of course, and runs away, runs into pirates, all sorts of things. And then we also follow another perspective of this young man who decides to help find her. Anyway, so it sounds very tropey, and as far as I remember, it kind of is, but it also was the first book to ever make me like sob. So, you know, it's got that going for it, and I would like to get to it in the next few months if possible to mark it off of my goals. So anyway, we'll just go with that for now. Up next, we have historical fiction, but I'm going to narrow this down to specifically like medieval, Roman, and Renaissance type historical fiction as opposed to like World War II or other types of historical fiction. I do like those other types, but recently I've been a lot more intrigued by more like medieval or like Renaissance and earlier type historical fiction. So as far as a favorite goes, I honestly need a second to think about that because it's pretty recent that I've started to read these types of stories. I'm just going to go with the one I actually just finished as well. So this will cover the book I mostly recently read in this genre as well as the book that I consider my favorite as of right now, and that is Blood and Beauty, The Borgias by Sarah Dunant. This is, like it says, about the Borgia family, and it's really, really well done. I really liked the way the characters were explored in this. I found it very intriguing. I just really ended up enjoying it. I'm sure there are other books that will beat this out. I don't know if I would quite say that this is like a favorite of all time yet. But I did really, really enjoy this, and as I've been journeying through trying to read more historical fiction like this one has definitely surprised me a lot, and like I said, it's also the one I most recently read, so there's that. As for what I'm going to read next, I think I'm going to go with probably The Forgotten Kingdom by Signe Pike. This is the sequel to The Lost Queen by Signe Pike, which I guess you could kind of argue is sort of a fantasy because it's kind of like a historical fantasy, but it is set in like our worlds. It's about when the Angles and the Saxons started to get into Britannia and take on the Britons and things like that. So anyway, it's very much that time period and primarily focuses honestly on the history of it as opposed to the magic of it, but magic definitely plays a pretty big role. So, you know, you can argue with me that that's not quite the same thing, but I'm going to say it is. The other one, though, that is on my radar that I wouldn't mind getting to soon, actually a couple others that I'll mention, is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. I really want to get into that series and I think I'll really enjoy it. Another one that's caught my attention is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. That's on my TBR. And then The Sun and Splendor by Sharon K. Penman, which is about Richard III and his life. Those four are all on my radar, and I honestly think all four of those have potential to beat out Blood and Beauty as my favorite in this genre. But like I said, it's pretty new to me, but it's definitely becoming a favorite genre for me. It's one I really want to get into a lot more. And last but not least, we are going to get into historical nonfiction. A lot of history on this list, but you know, that tends to be what draws my attention the most, but they are different genres in the end. They are pretty different. So anyway, let's get into this genre. So historical nonfiction favorites. Both of my favorites actually I read last year in 2020. It wasn't until like 2019, 2020 that I started reading a lot more nonfiction, but my favorites that I read last year, one is The Creation of Anne Boleyn by Susan Bordeaux. This is a story or a book about, not necessarily about Anne Boleyn's life, but rather about how she became viewed the way she is today, what went into that, the different, you know, opinions over time about her and perspectives over time about her based on hearsay, a lot of it based on words from her enemies, based on secondary and tertiary sources regarding her, so just a lot of that stuff, as well as the media portrayals. So in The Other Boleyn Girl by Philippa Gregory, Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, and in the Tudor TV series, how she's portrayed in those and how that influences people's perspectives on her. And I really, really liked it. I found it very fascinating. The other one I really liked that I read at the end of 2020 was The Five by Hallie Rubenhold. If you still have not read this book, you really just need to. It's so good. It's about the 5 women who were killed by Jack the Ripper and just about their lives. It's not about their deaths, it's about their lives and who they were as people, and also a great look at just Victorian society in general. and how that impacted these women's lives, and it's very, very fascinating. I absolutely adored that book, so that's one you should definitely check out if you haven't already. Currently, I am reading The Brontes by Juliet Barker. This is a massive novel, or not novel, it's a nonfiction work, a massive book about the whole Bronte family, starting with Patrick Bronte, the father of the Bronte sisters, and then going down to the end of all of their lives. And it's a really, really great look, interesting look at them. This is definitely one, because it's so big, you have to be interested in the Brontes to make your way through it. If you don't care much about them or aren't that intrigued by them, definitely don't read this, because it's a lot of information, but I love the Brontes, so I have loved reading this. I'm actually reading it with Emily from Novelle Novels, and it's going so well. So last but not least, what is the next historical nonfiction I plan to read? And again, I do not know. A couple that, here, let me pull up my Goodreads and I'll just name off a couple that have caught my attention recently. Okay, one that's caught my attention is Young and Damned and Fair by Gareth Russell, and that one's about Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of Henry VIII, who I find very interesting. Another one that has caught my attention is The Royal Art of Poison by Eleanor Herman, which is about not only like poisoning between people during medieval times, but also just like all the things that they were surrounded by that actually could kill them. Like even just the medicines they used at the time were poisonous, and so things like that just sounds very interesting. Oh, one that I know I'm going to be reading in the next few months, so it very possibly will be the next nonfiction I read in general, and I don't know if you would call it historical nonfiction because it's not about specific people or anything. It's kind of more of a literary criticism, but I'm going to mention it because it probably does discuss to some extent culture during a certain time period, just based on the literature it's criticizing, or not criticizing, it's discussing, and that is What Matters in Jane Austen by John Mullen. So this is a book discussing a bunch of different motifs and things in Jane Austen's works that are important. Again, I don't know how historical it's going to be, but I feel like there will be some historical, like cultural aspects to it that it will discuss. So I'll mention that because I know I'm going to read it for Jane Austen July, and before that, within May and June, I really don't know if I'm going to get to any other historical nonfiction. And if I do, it will probably be one of the ones I already mentioned. So we'll go with that. Oh, another one that I'll mention this as well, actually. Another one that has caught my attention is Royal Witches by Gemma Holman, which is about witches in the nobility in I think it's the 15th century, and just these women that were in higher up positions, including one Elizabeth Woodville, and her mother, who Elizabeth Woodville became Queen of England, and she was accused of witchcraft. So things like that, and I think that one will be interesting as well. So anyway, there's some options for myself. Who knows when I'll read those, because again, I'm taking part in a lot of classics-based readathons in the next couple months, so I'll be mostly focused on those, but I definitely will want to slide in a few other things just to break it up a little bit throughout the couple months. So anyway, that is that. Thank you so much for watching. I don't know who to tag. I don't know who's done this. One, I will tag Jennifer Brooks because I think it would be interesting to see her do this. And then I will let's tag Naomi from Naomi's Bookshelf. She may have done this, but I can't remember. So if she did, if you're watching this, Naomi, and you've done this, don't even worry about it. But I'm going to tag both of those people because I'd love to see them do it. So anyway, there's that. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you next week. Bye!